Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I promised to give you an update on the meeting of SADC. SADC heads of state are scheduled to meet tomorrow, 31st of October, to decide on whether to uphold the SADC damning report on Zimbabwe's 23rd of August election, or to sweep it under the carpet. Last time I did say that one of the biggest impediment in stopping SADC making the right decision was the African National Congress of South Africa. Their support of Zanu PF, they've made it very clear that they support Zanu PF. And at their Congress in November last year, the party came up with a party resolution that they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. This is a letter supposedly coming from ANC. I think it is an important letter, and it relates to the issue we are talking about here. I'll read it to you. This is dated the 29th of October, 2023. The ANC acknowledges the rapidly deteriorating political situation in Zimbabwe following the recent elections, which were deemed not credible by this Southern Africa Development Community, SADC. It is highly concerning that our brother, Amos Phango, has taken steps to violate the country's constitution by appointing the serving commander of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, Philip Valerio Spanda, to Zanu PF's Politburo. As the ANC, we have consistently called for the removal of sanctions against Zimbabwe. But given the new developments, we will find it difficult to continue to do so. As a party, we are conducting an internal investigation to uncover any business interests our leader, President Cyril Ramaphosa, has with certain Zanu PF officials in Zimbabwe, and why our Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, constantly overlooks the crisis in Zimbabwe. These two individuals are obstacles to resolving Zimbabwe crisis. We hope that the investigation concludes swiftly to facilitate the removal of these two figures and allow South Africa to take decisive action in liberating the long-suffering people of Zimbabwe. This really comes as wonderful news to anybody in Zimbabwe. We cannot deny that the ANC is a leading figure in SADC. And in this particular case, we cannot deny that if ANC was to decide that they would not support Zimbabwe, or rather, they would not support SADC's position to condemn the recent elections as a farce. Most SADC countries, as much as they may not agree with that, may find it very difficult to defy South Africa, because as the main player in the region, none of them could deny that if South Africa was to fail to support SADC on this important matter, the others remaining SADC countries will be able to sustain anything substantive. What do I mean by that? Well, the most important thing is if SADC was to decide to uphold the damning report, the consequences of that is that the Zanu PF government will have to be declared as illegitimate, because the report itself was very clear. The process was flawed and illegal. Declaring the Zanu PF regime illegitimate has got the consequences of we have got now to come up with a legitimate government. And everybody would know that Zanu PF will not take that sitting down, because Zanu PF knows that unlike in 2008, where I think Mugabe must have guessed that you'll probably be able to get away with to implement any meaningful reform, because he knew Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends. I think now Mnangagwa will know that stopping the reforms being implemented the second time round will be a lot more difficult. So it is almost certain that the reforms will be implemented this second time. SADC itself, it is in its interest, of course, to make sure that this time the reforms are implemented. And so SADC will be taking a lot to make sure that the reforms are implemented. And if South Africa is not playing an active role in that, I think most SADC countries would hesitate to go ahead. So what we are seeing here is a situation where ANC was piling on the pressure on SADC to endorse Zanu PF's victory. But this letter now changes everything. ANC, particularly the Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, has been very clear. They will not support regime change in Zimbabwe under the pretext that Zimbabwe is under Western imposed sanctions, and therefore then it is impossible to hold free, fair, and credible election. That is irrational, because even South Africa has got to admit that sanctions or no sanctions, the right of the citizen to free, fair, and credible elections cannot be withdrawn just because there are sanctions. I think in the past, SADC has managed to get away with it when the SADC election observer teams have come up with reports like, the elections were substantially free, fair, and credible, which is what they did in 2013 and 2018. This time round, it was going to be a lot more difficult because SADC's own election observers, and in fact, the regional body, the continental body, AU, own election observers also endorsed the position that the elections in Zimbabwe in August were not free, fair, and credible. So this time, South Africa would have found itself in with a mountain to climb. Are we saying that fundamental rights, like the meaningful say in the governance of the country, are suspended if there are sanctions? This is the position that the ANC will have to face, given the present situation. And I think this letter emphasizes that point. ANC was giving its blind support to Zanu PF. I am not one to speculate on the reasons why the ANC leaders felt this was necessary. But this letter clearly shows that maybe those two leaders, the president of South Africa and the ANC Secretary General, had some personal interest why they continue to blindly support Zanu PF. But I think it is important here to note that the ANC as a party is not only doing Zimbabwe a great favor by upholding the damning report. ANC is endorsing SADC's own position because, like it or not, if they were to sweep this report under the carpet, it will send a clear message that SADC has no political credibility at all. And I think the rest of the SADC citizens out there will have good cause to be concerned. Because if leaders can rig elections, as they did in Zimbabwe, as SADC's own observers clearly observed, and get away with it, what is there to stop that happening in any of the other SADC countries? In South Africa itself, Botswana, Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, you name it, all the SADC countries will have to face that reality that someday you may find yourself in a situation where you've got an incumbent regime that decides that they are not going to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And if this precedent is set, what is there to stop that being repeated in other SADC countries? But of course, setting that precedence would be a total disaster for Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a failed state. The consequences of that is the economic meltdown. The Zimbabwe economy has completely collapsed. There is political repression, and at the present moment, the country is just idling, drifting with the current. And we can envisage ourselves as drifting upstream of the Kariba, of the Victoria Falls. The future is going to get rougher and rougher and dangerous, and dangerously so. Zimbabwe desperately needs to end this cycle of bad governance, rigged elections and bad governance. This is our way out of it. The SADC election observers had done Zimbabwe a great service when they declared that the election process was flawed. And SADC leaders tomorrow will do Zimbabwe a great service by upholding that report. If SADC leaders were to sweep that report under the carpet, they will have let the people of Zimbabwe down badly. Because one is going to ask, if we are not going to get regime change in Zimbabwe through peaceful means, how are we going to get it? The only other option is a coup or street protests or a combination of both. The last coup failed to bring about any meaningful change. It was just musical chair within Zanu PF itself. The corruption, the mismanagement, the vote rigging, etc. continued. Another coup, I don't think it will change much. Street protests, if that succeeds, in the past they have not been successful because the regime is used violence. And in the future, they'll do the same. But even if they still succeed, at the present moment, Zimbabwe's political system, I've often compared it to a sewage pond. You cannot get quality leaders from a political system that is so corrupt that only leaders who are thugs would want to be in politics or would want to participate. That is where we are. What we need is to reform the system to drain this sewage pond so that we can fill it up again with clean water and introduce quality fish. Only then can we have quality leaders out of it. Without reform, Zimbabwe will be just going round and round in circles. Some people would want to argue that the opposition have something to offer. Ask yourself, in 23 years of the MDC/CCC, they were elected on a ticket to implement democratic reform. And yet, after 23 years, they failed to implement even one meaningful reform, even when they had the golden opportunity to do so during the GNU. This is where we are. We cannot pretend that the present political system can ever produce quality leaders. It cannot. I'm hoping that this ANC letter is going to be a game changer. I seriously hope that it is not just fake, but a genuine letter coming from the ANC leadership expressing their concern about what is going on in Zimbabwe. ANC's influence in trying to continue to support Zanu PF has been a thorn in the people of Zimbabwe. As much as the people of Zimbabwe have been fighting for free, fair, and credible elections, ANC's determination to support Zanu PF no matter what has undermined that. And I think ANC membership, fellow leaders are beginning to wake up to that reality. And they could not have done it at a better time than now. I hope that this letter is going to send waves within ANC, and that at tomorrow's meeting, SADC heads of state President Cyril Ramaphosa is not going to make the mistake of trying to prop up Emerson Mnangagwa. The Zimbabwe election on the 23rd of August were flawed and illegal. They could not possibly produce a legitimate government. The Zanu PF regime in power today is illegitimate. Their CCC sidekick are also illegitimate. What are the options? 3 options have been floated around. The first one, which is CCC's position, is that there should be fresh elections in 3 to 6 months' time, supervised by SADC. This option should be dismissed with the contempt it rightly deserves. We failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections for the last 43 years. If we're going to hold free, fair, and credible elections, we have got to implement far-reaching democratic reforms, which CCC, then MDC, were supposed to implement during the last GNU of 2008 to 2013, and they failed to implement even one. No meaningful reforms can be implemented in 6 months. And even if we do hold elections and SADC supervise them, SADC will have to leave after those 6 months. And the present system with the police, ZEC, and so forth, those bodies we know they are Zanu PF in all but name. They will revert to their default setting. Are we going to call SADC again? This is just a futile exercise, meaningless. Let's sort this out properly. The second solution offered was that there should be another GNU of Zanu PF and CCC. That one should also be dismissed with the contempt it deserves. If the 2 parties fail to implement even one meaningful reform during the last GNU, what hope is there that they will do so now? None. At least we should have the common sense to realize that it did not work last time. We should not make the same mistake again. The third option was that we should have a third of MDC or CCC, a third Zanu PF, and a third technocrats in a National Transition Authority. The fact that we elect Zanu PF and CCC shooting 2/3 of that National Transition Authority is a serious problem in itself. What could the technocrats achieve when those two feel that they are the ones who should be ruling the country and the technocrats are nothing more than imposters? I think the technocrats will be very lucky to implement even a handful of reforms. We should not set ourselves for another failure. I think SADC should have the courage to say, okay, last time we tried it, we failed. Let's get the UN to be involved in deciding what happens next in Zimbabwe. And I think the UN's involvement will give the impetus and the courage to look for a real solution, not another quick fix. And the real solution here is a national transition authority composed entirely of technocrats. CCC and Zanu PF should not have any part at all to play. We know that Zanu PF will, from the word go, do its best to make Zimbabwe ungovernable, because Zanu PF believes that they have got the divine right to rule Zimbabwe. This is what the reforms are all about. The reforms are all about restoring the right of every citizen of Zimbabwe to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That is at the root of the reforms. We need a body that is going to stand firm on that principle, that no one has a right to be above the law. Zanu PF believes that they are above the law. They have got the right to rule the country. I think we need a body that's going to stand up from the word go and reaffirm that position, that no one has got the right to rule the country. That right must be derived from the people in a free, fair, and credible election. And the primary purpose of the National Transition Authority is to implement those democratic reforms to ensure that the elections are free, fair, and credible. Not only the next election, but for the future generations as well. After 43 years of rigged elections, I think Zimbabweans must come now to the decision that this must not be repeated. Let's get something right. Well, here is something to get right. After 43 years, let's hold free, fair, and credible elections. And to do that, we must implement the democratic reforms to ensure that elections are indeed free, fair, and credible. So, in conclusion, I would say that this letter from ANC is a wake-up call to our friends south of the Limpopo, that what they are doing, what they've been doing in Zimbabwe, is not right. ANC has been propping up Zanu PF. That is a fact. And we are pleased to see that there are some people within the party itself who recognizes this problem and have come out to say, no, this is not right. And we applaud that. I hope tomorrow, by this time, we will have learned that SADC have upheld the SADC election observer team's report on Zimbabwe, that the elections were not free, fair, and credible, and that they've declared the Zanu PF regime and its sidekick, CCC, are illegitimate. Let's hope so. I think this letter gives us reason to be hopeful that rationale would prevail tomorrow. This is not only good for Zimbabwe, it's good for South Africa itself, it's good for the whole region, SADC region. With that, thank you very much for listening, and good day.